Today we are looking at the night when Richard Dawkins, the top atheist in the world, was left speechless. Two big minds, both from Oxford University, locked horns in a vicious debate. This is Richard Dawkins and John Lennox. Now, this isn't just two professors talking. It is atheism versus Christianity, head to head at Oxford University. And today I'm going to walk you through the first theme of their clash. Has science buried God? We are going to watch some key moments, then I'll pause and I'll share some thoughts along the way. By the end, you'll see why Dawkins, the so-called world's greatest atheist, ends up shocked, even left without words. And by the end, we'll see the conclusion whether science buries God or actually points to God. If you are new here, I'm Dr. K, a theologian, polemist, author, and international consultant. In addition to 3 other degrees, I hold 2 PhDs and a degree in theology with distinction. I specialize in analyzing doctrines, texts, and any philosophical persuasion that contradict Scripture. If you crave such deep dives, subscribe and smash the notice bell so you don't miss what is coming. Let's jump in right away.
We'll begin with Richard. Richard, the question as we begin is, has science buried God?
Well, which God? I mean, we could take Einstein's God, which is not really a personal God at all, but which is a sort of poetic metaphor for the mystery, that which we don't understand about the universe. We could take a deist God, a sort of God of the physicists, a God of somebody like Paul Davies, who devised the laws of physics, God the mathematician, God who put together the cosmos in the first place and then sat back and watched everything happen. And that would be, the deist God would be one that I think it would be, one could make a reasonably respectable case for that, not a case that I would accept, but I think it is a serious discussion that we could have. The third kind of God is one of which there are thousands and thousands of varieties, Zeus and Thor and Apollo and Amun-Ra and Yahweh. And we don't actually need to go through all those because I've, as Larry has said, I've encountered John Lennox before, and I know what the God he believes in, which is the Christian God. So we only have to talk about the Christian God. John Lennox is a scientist who believes that Jesus turned water into wine. A scientist who believes that Jesus somehow influenced all those molecules of H2O and introduced proteins and carbohydrates and tannins and alcohol and turned it into wine. He believes that Jesus walked on water. I had been accustomed to debating with sophisticated theologians, and I come across John Lennox, who is a scientist who believes in all those things. In particular, he believes that the creator of the universe, the God who devised the laws of physics, the laws of mathematics, the physical constants, who devised the parsecs of space, billions of light years of space, billions of years of time, that this paragon of physical science, this genius of mathematics, couldn't think of a better way to rid the world of sin than to come to this little speck of cosmic dust and have himself tortured and executed so that he could forgive himself. That is profoundly unscientific. Not only is it unscientific, it doesn't do justice to the grandeur of the universe. It's petty and small-minded, and that's the God that John Lennox believes in.
Dawkins begins by mocking miracles. Miracles like turning water into wine or resurrection are profoundly unscientific. He even laughs and says, which God are we talking about? Zeus, Thor, or Yahweh? One of the things that I've noticed with Christian debaters, they remain calm and unrevealed. but their counterparts are the exact opposite: arrogant, impatient, and impolite. Even if you don't believe in something, at least have some courtesy for those who do. You might just find that you are wrong. Now, here is the problem with Dawkins. What he's talking about is not science. That's ridicule. Now, he is dismissing claims without even giving them a chance of an investigation. After all, science is a methodology, a step-by-step process of testing an hypothesis with facts. And there are certain things that are amenable to scientific investigations and those that are not. So he is dismissing claims without even engaging evidence. So he thinks he believes in science, not knowing that his belief in atheism is also a belief, is also a religion. It's a religion without God. It's like a student who refuses to open an exam booklet because he has already decided the answers must be wrong. The irony, Dawkins prides himself in evidence-based reasoning. But here, he shuts the door to history before examining it. So he has already decided. No need for any investigation, which goes contrary to the science he believes in. Is this debate resonating with you? If it is, kindly do me a favor. Like, subscribe, and smash the notice bell so that when I upload episode 2, you'll receive a notification. Now, let's look at how Lennox responds. Here's the clip.
I'm glad to hear you say that you feel a good case could be made out that there is rationality behind the universe. You said it's not something you personally accept. So you believe that this universe is just a freak accident. There's no mind behind it. And yet here you are with one of the best minds in the world. So you believe a number of things that I, as a scientist, find very difficult to believe. And we can certainly talk about my specific Christian faith later, but I confess to it absolutely. I think that there is a creator of the universe. He created it, but he's not just a force, he's a person. And we are persons created in his image. And you say that God becoming human and Christ dying on a cross and rising from the dead is petty. I think the exact opposite. It's not petty, because it deals seriously with the fundamental problem that I don't think atheism even begins to deal with, and that is the problem of our alienation with God. Of course, that makes no sense unless we believe in God. So I don't know how we should proceed. Perhaps the best way to start would be this. As a scientist, we both believe in the rational intelligibility of the universe. I believe the universe is rationally intelligible because there's a creator God behind it. Well, let's go back to the level of the origins of the universe and the origin of life. Now, life, as we both know, has got this digital database. It's got a language all of its own. Now, the only thing we know of capable of producing language is mind. And yet you reject that. By definition, as an atheist, you must reject that. There's no mind behind this language.
I do reject it. When you say the only thing we know that can produce language is mind, I mean, we know that what produces human language is mind. Of course we do, because that's human language. But DNA is not human language.
Yeah, but
DNA
it's very sophisticated.
It's very sophisticated, but it doesn't follow that it has to be generated by mind.
Now wait for this moment. You see Dawkins failing to respond. He's quiet.
But we know of no other conceivable way of it being generated. You see, because it seems to me from the mathematical point of view, I think you said this somewhere in a different context, junk in, junk out. Here we have this phenomenally sophisticated information processor, which is the cell. Am I really to believe that that information processing capacity simply came about by the laws of nature and random processes without a mind?
Yes.
Well,
absolutely.
I find that impossible to believe as a mathematician.
I know you do. This is called the argument from personal incredulity.
But I could just reverse that and says your position is the argument from personal credulity.
No,
that
because
rationality comes from
hit-back
irrationality, that mind comes from matter. To me, the biblical explanation in the beginning was the word, the logos. That makes perfect sense. And it makes sense of the fact that we can do science itself.
But you haven't explained where the logos came from in the first
Well,
place.
of course not, because the
Dawkins
logos
doesn't
didn't
seem
come
even
from
to understand
anywhere.
what
Well,
an
then,
eternal
in
God
what
is all
sense is it an
about.
explanation?
Because the notion that you say you have to ask who created the logos, that says that you're thinking of a created God. The whole point about the God revealed in the Bible is that he was not created. He is eternal. He is the eternal logos. And I ask myself, as an inference to the best explanation, which makes more sense? That there's an eternal logos and that the universe, its laws, the capacity for mathematical description and so on, that these things are derivative, including the human mind, from the logos. That makes very much more sense to me as a scientist than it's the other way round, when there is no explanation for the existence of the universe. Do you just believe the universe is a brute fact?
Now listen to Lennox here. He is calm, measured, almost grandfatherly, but don't miss brilliance. If the universe is just chaos, why is it orderly? How can they uncover black holes and DNA? Lennox points to the Logos, who is Jesus Christ, the rational creator. The same word John uses in the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And through him all things were made. Now that's not a retreat into mystery. That shows that the very rationality of science only makes sense if the universe was created by a rational mind. Dawkins wants to pit science against God. Lennox says science exists because of God. Which worldview actually fits reality better? Let's look at Dawkins' trap. He asks a question. The famous Dawkins line.
But you haven't explained where the logos came from in the first
Well,
place.
of course not, because the logos didn't come from anywhere.
Well, then, in what sense is it an explanation?
I'm sure he prides himself in asking that question, thinking that that's a very brilliant question. But you see the folly in that question, because God by definition is eternal. He was not created. If he was created by something, then you'll have to find out what created that thing that created God, and then find out what else that created what created God. And if God can be created, he cannot be eternal. I know our minds cannot fathom this concept because we have a beginning and an end. Most of the things we know start and end. The question sounds clever, not so. But Lennox dismantles it in seconds. He says, God by definition is eternal. Here's a clip.
The universe is an easier brute fact to accept than a conscious creator.
Well, who made it?
It's you who insists on asking that question.
No, you asked me who made the creator. The universe created you, Richard. Who made it
Here's
then?
another question
A
that
God
Dawkins
is a
refuses to
complicated
answer.
entity which requires a much more sophisticated and difficult explanation than a universe which is, according to modern physics, a very simple entity. It's a very simple beginning. It's not a negligible beginning, but it's a
Here's
very
where
simple beginning.
Dawkins
that has got
contradicts
to be
himself
easier
again.
to explain
He has
than something as
acknowledged
complicated
that
as a God.
Yeah,
that
you
God
can't
is
explain the existence of God, but
complicated
I think you may have missed my
explain, or
question.
very difficult to
I'm drawing a
explain.
parallel. You see, you say that it's, at least, don't let me put words in your mouth, of course, because that would be unfair, but I'm getting the message that it's ridiculous for me to believe in a God who created the universe and me, because I have to ask who created God. All I'm doing is turning that question round and saying, the universe, you admit, created you because there's nothing else. Well, then who created it?
Again, Lennox here turns Dawkins' logic against him.
Both of us are faced with the problem of saying, how did things start?
Yes.
I'm saying it's a hell of a lot easier to start with something simple than to start with something complex. That's what complex means.
But I don't think so. If I pick up a book called The God Delusion, it's a pretty sophisticated book. It's got lots of words in it. But actually, as I look at page 1, I don't even need to go beyond page 1, I conclude that it comes from something more complex than that book itself, namely you.
Yes.
Richard agrees with Lennox here.
Exist and brains exist.
Well,
and
why
brains
can
are
I not
complex.
look at the universe, the whole show, which includes
Well, I'll tell
Dawkins
you
and
why.
Lennox?
I'll tell you why. Because my brain that produced a book has an explanation in its own right. That explanation is evolution. We go back and back and back to the origin of the universe. That provides an explanation for complex brains, and complex brains produce books and museums and cars and computers. Of course we have complex things that produce other complex things. But science has an explanation for where complex brains come from in terms of simple beginnings.
I don't think it has at all. At the level of the origin of life, reading the literature, even the recent literature, the word miracle comes up probably far too often for your liking anyway, that they're just going from, say, the self-organizational properties of low-level molecules that you got in some kind of primeval situation to the phenomenal self-organizational potentialities of macromolecules. There's just no way you can get there.
Well, you're asserting that there's no way. We don't yet know what it is because there's a lot of work yet to be done. Science doesn't yet know everything. There are still gaps.
Yeah, but I'm not ruling out the fact that there's a physical side to it and so on. But it seems to me that the fact that the basic description of this ancient language, and it's a very ancient language of DNA, points much more arguably to the existence of a logos, a divine logos who started it, than the notion that it's going to be exhaustively explained in purely naturalistic terms. Because I would still go back to the point I made earlier, although I don't want to harp on it. This extreme reductionism removes from me the very rationality which we use to have the discussion. So that I'm not simply terribly tempted to believe it's all been designed. I believe it's all been designed, but that doesn't, and here's something else that I'd like to bring up in this, that doesn't stop science. I fear sometimes that your dichotomy, either God or science, might put some people off science because they'd prefer God, and that would be a pity.
But here is a kicker. Dawkins himself thinks that the universe just exists as a brute fact. No cause, no explanation, just there. So if he can accept the uncaused universe, why can't he accept the uncaused God? That's not science. That's special pleading. I'm sure you are seeing the inconsistency. He demands Christians to explain their foundation, but he refuses to explain his own. That's not intellectual honesty, that's bias. Let's look at the miracle debate, science versus magic. Now here is where it gets juicy. If God can smuggle in miracles, science collapses. But Lennox flips it. He says, miracles don't destroy science. They presuppose it. Here's a clip.
And certainly when it comes up into more recent history, you mentioned miracles. The thing that is central for me is the fact that what you call petty, and I feel is vastly significant, because it's touching on something that affects every human being, the question of death. Now, if Jesus really literally rose from the dead as a matter of history, that makes an enormous difference to our view of the world. And so far from being petty, if this is God speaking to us, then I want to take it extremely seriously. Why do you think it's so petty?
Well, of course it makes a huge difference if it's true.
Yes, exactly.
But you've suddenly leapt from sophisticated discussions of the origin of the universe, where one can have a proper discussion about whether some sort of cosmic intelligence could have set forth the laws of physics, and you suddenly jump to a man who lived 2,000 years ago, was born of a virgin, rose again from the dead.
Well, I only did that because you mentioned it first at the beginning.
I think that's petty. By comparison with the grandeur of the universe. I mean, to put my point again, do you really think that the creator of this magnificent edifice of the universe, the expanding universe, the galaxies, he really couldn't think of a better way to get rid of the sins on this one little speck of dust than to have himself tortured? He's the one who's doing the forgiving after all. Couldn't he just have forgiven?
Because this is a moral universe, Richard, and just forgiving doesn't make sense.
I mean, he has to kill himself in order
He doesn't kill himself.
Or get himself killed, tortured.
God sends his Son into the world to provide forgiveness and to provide a basis on which he can justly bring forgiveness to me. Now,
he has to get himself killed in order to do that.
Well, half a minute. We need to step back from this a little bit because it's actually a highly relevant topic. In your world, where is justice to be found?
Well, justice is a human construct of great importance in human affairs, and it's something that
now listen to the question that John Lennox asks Richard,
which I think
and Richard here
some sort of Darwinian
seems to be
but I don't see where you're taking this.
unraveled.
My question
because he seems
is there any
calmer
justice?
than he normally is.
You see, you say this is petty. I'm saying I find myself in a world which is a broken world. I find myself in a world where there's massive injustice, where many people won't get it. We're so privileged. We live in Oxford and so on. We've got enough money to live on, etc., etc. But if there is no God, then there's no ultimate justice. And one of the things that the resurrection transforms for me from pettiness right into center stage is, if this is true, then there's real hope that there be a rational evaluation and fair justice at the end of the world. But atheism doesn't give you that.
Okay, suppose there is no hope, suppose there is no justice, suppose there's nothing but misery and darkness and bleakness.
Here comes the
nothing that we would wish for, nothing that we would hope for. Too bad. That doesn't make it true just because God would make us feel good.
Well, of course it doesn't.
Well, then why do you bring that argument up?
Because I believe that there is evidence that it is true.
Think about it. You only recognize a miracle because natural laws exist. Miracles, by definition and by nature, is the violation of natural laws. If water always runs downhill and suddenly it runs uphill, you know that something extraordinary has just happened. Now, the resurrection doesn't erase science. It stands out because of science. Actually, science makes it even more significant because it goes against the very rules that science investigates. Here is a biblical truth. Miracles are not random. They are signs. They point to God breaking into history for a purpose. As Hebrews 2 verse 4 says, God testified to salvation by signs, wonders, and various miracles. Let's look at Darwin's weak spot, origins of life. Let's watch the clip.
Well, you're hopping around from one
Yeah.
topic to another, but so we could do the origin of life, we could do the idea of miracles, the idea that somehow my approach to science puts people off. But, okay, let's do the last one then. When you feel like it, you will smuggle in magic. You will smuggle in magic for miracles in the Bible, you'll smuggle in magic for the origin of life. I can't explain the origin of life at the moment. I mean, nobody can, people are working on it.
But you believe that it will have a naturalistic solution?
Yes, I think that it is a cowardly cop-out to suggest that just because we don't yet understand something, therefore magic did it.
Oh, well, I would agree with that. I mean, the God of the gaps idea.
Well, but that's exactly what you're putting forward, the God of the gaps. You're saying, you're pointing to the origin of life, you're pointing to the origin of DNA and saying, oh, well, okay, Darwin's done everything after the origin of life, but he hasn't done the origin of life.
No,
that's the God of the gaps.
I think what I'm saying here is that there may well be two kinds of gaps. That is, there are bad gaps that science closes. But could it not be that science can open some gaps? Now, what I mean by that is this. Your assumption, as I understand it, is that there's going to be an exhaustive, reductionist, naturalistic explanation of everything in scientific terms. I don't think so. Now, if there is a God, and if he created this universe, and if, as I believe, he is personal, then I would expect certain things to follow. One, that I would see evidence, not proof, but evidence in the universe that God existed. I feel I see that in the mathematical describability of the universe, in the fine-tuning of the universe, and so on, and in the marvelous sophistication of the world. I'd expect to see God's traces there. I would also expect that there may be occasions when God speaks in special ways, and therefore the more we try to analyze those things in terms of purely reductionist science, it'll get more and more difficult instead of more and more simple. I wouldn't expect there to be many of those places. I think the origin of life might be one of them.
Here is the moment most people miss. Dawkins admits, we don't yet know how life began. We don't have a Darwin for physics. There's just a Darwin for biology. But instead of saying, let's follow evidence wherever it leads us, he slams the door. It can't be God. Now, friends, that's not an open inquiry. That's pure prejudice. That's like saying, we don't know the answer yet, but one thing we know is that it can't be God. But wait a second. Isn't that the very definition of a closed mind? The mind that believes in science? The mind says we may not have the answer, but we know science will find the answers? And that's where Dawkins' biggest weakness. His naturalism isn't freeing science. It is choking it. The climax. The giant stumbles. By this time, the incredible happens. Dawkins, usually so quick with words, starts to stumble. His arguments sound recycled. His tone shifts from confident to defensive. And Lennox, calm, clear, pointing to the deeper truth, science and God are not enemies. Science flows naturally from the universe created by a rational, personal God. So it's David versus Goliath. And on this night, Goliath blinked. So now let's step back. Why does this matter for us today? It matters because every Christian has a moment where his faith is mocked as anti-science, where we are told miracles are fairy tales. Who made God? But this debate shows the truth. Science doesn't bury God. It presupposes him. Miracles don't destroy science. they highlight God's power. And atheism was exposed as not being absence of faith. It is just faith in something else. Often blind faith in materialism. Life is meaningless, purposeless. We are just an accident that is happening on earth. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27, God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. The wise of those days expected the spectacular. And God used simple method. God used the cross to save us from our sins. And the wise find that to be very foolish, insignificant, confirming what is already written in the Bible. And on that night at Oxford, that's exactly what happened. The so-called world's greatest atheists left shocked, even speechless. So the next time somebody tells you science buried God, remember this moment. Science doesn't silence God's voice. It amplifies it. In episode 2, we consider their next theme, design or chance. To watch part 2 when it is available, click on this link. So what do you think about this debate? Who do you think carried the day? Dawkins or Lennox?